Hi, my name is Sydney Grushat, and this is my second part of my second semester final exam. And I am going over LGBTQ rights, but specifically transgender bathroom laws. Recently in North Carolina, there was a battle in federal courts that limited the public bathroom access for transgender people. This issue really erupted when Obama was elected president because North Carolina had a majority vote for Bush instead of Obama. And automatically, when Obama was for transgenders and the LGBTQ community, North Carolina had a few issues with him. But as well, we're against the policies that Obama brought with his presidency. Over these past few months, North Carolina has been in an insane battle with federal courts, and they have actually been the first state to ban people from using multiple occupancy restrooms or changing rooms in public buildings and schools that do not match their sex on their birth certificate. Many issues have arisen from this battle because the LGBTQ community has recently become very popular from its recent legalization of gay marriage in 2015. And a lot of people were really upset on this distinct harassment that has isolated these transgender individuals from their peers. In more recent news from this past week that sparked from this North Carolina battle, the Department of Education has stated that every public school in the United States must provide a suitable bathroom and locker room facilities to match transgender students' chosen gender identity. Included in this decision was Title IX, which was written in 1972 and utilizes the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Title IX is a landmark federal civil right that prohibits sex discrimination in education and as well states that schools must be proactive in ensuring that your campus is free of sex discrimination. Under federal law, Title IX, schools that receive federal funding are not allowed to discriminate against students on the basis of sex. The guidance sent out to school districts on Friday makes it clear that as far as the Departments of Justice and Education are concerned, the word sex includes gender identity. This brings me to the main part of my current event, which is the Obama administration and their impact on the transgender bathroom law. Their letter states that schools may not require transgender students to have a medical diagnosis or undergo any medical treatment or produce a birth certificate before treating them accordingly to their gender identity. This is a really positive outcome for transgender students because it gives them the ability to live and actually be treated as the individual they feel as though they should have been born as. And on a side note, which somewhat contrasts this whole idea of fairness in the United States between transgenders and everyone else, is a poll that was hosted by the Obama administration. And this is the Reuters and Ipsos poll, where 44% of people said that the transgenders should use bathrooms according to their biological sex, whereas 39% said that they should be used according to their gender, with they identify. Overall, when reading my articles, which I found on CNN, the biggest thing I got out of them was that departments don't have the force of law, but contain an implicit threat that schools which don't abide by the Obama administration's interpretation of the law could face lawsuits or loss of federal aid. And a very large impact on this whole situation was Loretta Lynch, who's a U.S. Attorney General, and she actually stated that there was no room in schools for discrimination of any kind, and that this guidance gives administrators, teachers, and parents the tools they need to protect transgender students from peer harassment. Overall, this has safeguarded transgender students' privacy and the use of proper pronouns that relate to their gender identity. This current event is very significant because it represents how the transgender community has finally come out of their shell and shows how they have started and will continue to fight for their own rights. My first historical connection is Miss Magazine, and a little bit of background on the thought of woman. A subjective thought would be that the prehistoric women were generally the gatherers of plant foods, small animal foods, and fish, while the men hunted. And a little bit later, the middle class were involved in domestic tasks, mainly child care, while the lower class sought employment outside of the home, and all had lower wages than the pay that men were making. This leads me to the late 1960s, where the first time colleges offered women's studies as an academic subject, while most books traditionally excluded women's ideas, contributions, and experiences. The next part of the Miss Magazine background is the civil rights of 1964. And in this time, women's rights were not considered civil rights in the U.S. until women successfully lobbied to include a provision against sexual discrimination. And this leads me to the first issue of Miss Magazine. This is a magazine that began as a sample insert in the New York Magazine in December of 1971. And people really suddenly realized that it would become a landmark institution in both women's rights and U.S. journalism. This championed the struggle for women's equality and celebrated women's new freedom. This gets me to the first issue, which was founded in the spring of 1972 by Gloria Steinman and Patricia Carbin. They were co-founders of the magazine and eventually turned it into an ad-free periodical. The cover, shown on the top right, featured a woman handling more tasks than would be physically possible. And then, when you opened it up, there was an essay by Johnny Tillman, who was an African-American welfare rights leader and community activist. She was a national advocate for poor women, and she really sparked this up in 1963. So she had a good background on women's rights before writing for the magazine. And in her essay, she brought attention to welfare as a valid concern of feminism. And later on in the issue, we get to the I Want a Wife satire from Judy Brady about relegating women to the roles of the housewife. And Jane O'Reilly's essay of feminist awakening is called The Housewife's Movement of Truth. And there was the question of what would women be if they had their own identity and choices, not just defined by what was expected of them because they were women. Overall, the impact of Miss Magazine was very iconic. You can even see that in this first issue. It was a very colorful picture of a powerful superhero that would never have appeared on any other magazine. And part of a movement that was stirring in the hearts of girls and women across the country kind of sparked after reading this magazine. They all went out and they fought for what they believed in. This magazine inspired women to demand their rights, broaden their aspirations, feel less isolated, and as well speak truth to power. After the issues came out, there was a height of second wave feminism. The first issue brought uproar, protest, and heavy arguments, including responses and discussion of Equal Rights Amendment. And the first Equal Rights Amendment article was published in July of 1973. And the flood of women's liberation movement led to the creation of Miss Magazine and a supreme feminist source. This relates to my current event of transgender bathroom equal rights because in both situations, the parties who were considered inferior during both of these times came up and actually toppled over the superior powers, and they fought back for all of their rights, and they actually had justified reasoning, and it really showed, and they won in the end. And my second historical connection would be the women's rights of 1970. This was a grand American feminist movement, and it broke down the barriers for women. In 1960s, a woman was expected to follow one path: to marry in her early 20s, start a family quickly, and devote her life to homemaking. They were legally subject to their husbands and had no legal right to any of their husband's earnings or property aside from a limited right to proper support. 38% of American women who worked in 1960 were largely limited to jobs as teacher, nurse, or secretary. In these professional programs, women were generally unwelcome. Because of this result, in 1960, women accounted for 6% of American doctors, 3% of lawyers, and less than 1% of engineers. During this time, women were paid lower salaries than men and denied opportunities to advance, as employers assumed that they would soon become pregnant and quit their job, and that unlike men, they did not have families to support. In the year 1962, Betty Friedan created a book called The Feminine Mystique. This captured the frustration and even the despair of a generation of college-educated housewives who oftentimes felt trapped and unfulfilled. Her work had such an impact that it is credited with sparking the second wave of the American feminist movement. Decades earlier, the first wave had pushed for American suffrage and the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote in 1920. This generation pushed for equality beyond the law and into women's lives. In the 1960s and 70s, the feminist movement originally focused on dismantling the workplace inequality, such as denial of access to better jobs and as well salary inequity. Howard Smith, a representative of Virginia, proposed to add a prohibition of gender discrimination into the Civil Rights Act that was under consideration. He was actually laughed at for saying so, but with the leadership of Representative Martha Griffiths of Michigan, the law actually passed with the amendment intact. Although this law had passed, it became quickly clear that the newly established Equal Employment Opportunity Commission would not enforce the law's protection of women workers, and so a specific group of feminists, including Betty Friedan, decided to found an organization that would fight gender discrimination through the courts and legislatures. In 1966, the National Organization for Women, or known as NOW, was founded and went on to lobby Congress for pro-equality laws and assist women seeking legal aids as they battled workplace discrimination in the courts. The women during these times sought not to dismantle the prevailing system, but to open it up for women's participation on a public political level. This movement was not just a small group of people, it was a large amount of women who came together to fulfill their goal of getting equality in regards to the woman compared to the male. Some important things that Betty Friedan did was she held a bra-burning, anti-man, politics of orgasm, school of feminism, and she even spent years insinuating that the young feminist leader Gloria Steinem had sinister links to the FBI and CIA. During this time, the FBI viewed the women's movement as a part of the enemy, a challenge to American values, as well as potentially violent and linked to other extremist movements. Overall, the women's movement used different means to strive for equality. They used lobbying Congress to change laws, publicizing issues like rape and domestic violence through the media, and reaching out to ordinary women to both expand the movement and raise their awareness of how feminism could help them. In the campaigns for the legalization of abortion, activists testified before state legislatures and held public speakouts where women admitted to illegal abortions and explained their reasons for abortion. These events brought abortion out of the closet where it had been hidden in secrecy and shame. This phenomenon had also been used to talk about rape. The women's movement was producing a large number of journals in local communities across the country. While these journals were producing large amounts of members of the movement, Gloria Steinem magazines, founded in 1971, expanded the audience to the general public at a national level. By the late 1970s, women had made tangible, far-reaching gains, including the outlawing of gender discrimination in education, college sports, and obtaining financial credit, the banning of employment discrimination against pregnant women, the legalization of abortion and birth control, as well as the grounds for divorce and equalization of property division during divorce. In August of 1970, a nationwide wave of protest marches and sit-ins captured the spirit of optimism. This was known as the Women's Strike for Equality. In the end of the 1970s, activists burned out and the women's movement fragmented, but the services they founded, such as rape crisis centers, women's shelters, and health clinics, were integrated into the mainstream as cities, universities, and religious organizations provided program funding. Because of what happened in the past, today, women have equal access to education, increased participation in politics and the workplace, their access to abortion and birth control, the existence of resources to aid domestic violence and rape victims, and the legal protection of women's rights. Similar to Miss Magazine, this connects to my current event because women came together and fought for something that they all believed in, and they created a movement out of it, which I believe the transgender people are doing right now in regards to the United States and Obama, and they're working together to fight for what they believe in, and so far, a change has been made.